For some background information, I live in a small apartment complex right outside my campus with some friends. I am also a 20-year-old girl. So all my friends were always bashing on me for never meeting up with any boys or going. I'd gotten sick of it. I didn't want to be the little friend who stayed home and eats pizza while friends were out on dates with boys, so I signed up for Plenty of Fish. Now, I'm not the type of person who would say yes to any random stranger. They had to be nice looking, they had to have plenty of photos of themselves, and we both had to have at least 2 common interests. So with those rules in my head, I psyched myself up to join the world of online dating. Within a few days, I already had 2 boys I was talking to. One said he was a doctor, kinda hard to believe because he was 20, and one said he worked as a construction guy, easier to believe. I didn't think that the doctor guy was lying to me. But one day, as I was getting crap from my roommates, the construction guy, who we can call Dan, messaged me on a messaging app we were using and asked if I wanted to go out for a bite to eat. I told my roommates where I was going and who I was with. You know, all the things someone should do so someone knows if you've been abducted. I even had a check-in time so that when my roommates texted me if things were good, I had to say some silly code word that meant things were going good. If I responded with another code word, it meant help me get out of this, and if I didn't use code words, then she would call the police for help. So I quickly dolled myself up and got ready for my date. I put my hair in a classy bun, leaving strips of it hanging down around my glasses. I put on a nice white blouse and some black pants, and I was ready to go. I jumped in my car and headed out to the restaurant where Dan had chosen. It was just out of my town, but it was still only a 15-minute drive from my apartment. I arrived at the restaurant and saw him almost immediately. He was wearing some nice clothes and looked just like his photos. He was waiting just outside the restaurant doors for me. His eyes lit up when they saw me. He walked over to me and smiled. We chatted a little bit outside since it was summer and not too cold outside, and then walked inside. We ate dinner and talked about our life and things like how school was going. I got the text from my friend, but since everything was all good, I sent that good code word back. Dan talked about how much he liked his job and things, and altogether it was pretty nice. Except for one thing. Dan was boring. He didn't do anything exciting or really talk enthusiastic about anything, and it was boring. It was an average date, and I honestly didn't care to go on anymore. The next day I woke up to the feeling of my phone vibrating non-stop. I looked at it and realized it was vibrating so much that it had fallen off my dresser. I almost laughed. Then I saw all the messages were from Dan. At first they were all things of how much fun he had had and that he would really like to go out again. But then the messages took a turn. They got violent and angry that I wasn't responding. It was 7 in the frickin' morning. I was sleeping. I noped out of that situation. I texted him back and said I had been sleeping and that, no, I was not going on any more dates with him. I was just about to block his profile on both sites when I got a final message. "Watch your back," it said. At first I was really creeped out, but then I thought that since I had blocked him and all my accounts were deleted, he could do nothing. Wrong. Later that day I saw a text from a random number telling me how pretty I'd looked in my blue PJs. I glanced outside just in time to see none other than Dan running down my road. How the hell did he get my number? I thought warily. I blocked that number and continued what I was doing. Later that night I fell asleep pretty early and woke up to my phone text alert going crazy. It was from the number I had just blocked earlier that day. There were dozens of messages saying how I was going to get it. I quickly showed all my roommates the messages. They all told me that I should go to the police, but since I was a stupid person, I didn't. I blocked the number again and went back to sleep. But once again, I woke up to my phone buzzing. I didn't wait. I jumped in my car and drove all the way down to the police station. Once there, they told me they couldn't do much to help me and just told me to block the number. I did. At least I had it on record. Nothing happened for a few days. The number stayed blocked on my phone for a while. About then, the pictures started. They were pictures of my house, of me in my house, my car, and my work. I went back to the police, and finally, I was able to get a restraining order against Dan. I never received any messages from Dan again after that. I now never, ever use dating websites. At the age of around 6 or 7, I lived next door to an old 60 or so year old man named Keith. He would often go running around the streets as if he was very fit for his age. At the time, I lived with my grandmother. She was friends with him and would often invite him round for a cup of tea and to gossip. Things were fine for a little while, until one day I looked out my window in my bedroom. From my window I could clearly see into his garden. He was laying on a deck chair, masturbating. As I was a child, I didn't understand, of course. I assumed he didn't know I was there. The next day, I went to open the curtains in the morning and saw him doing the same thing again. He looked up at me and smiled, then carried on. A few weeks later, with me not mentioning it to my Nan, in case she thought I was lying about it, I continued to see him almost daily. I started to realize it wasn't right when I noticed he would make an effort to make me look, by doing such things as making loud noises outside and even shouting my name. Soon after it was my birthday, my Nan invited him round to my party as most of our neighbors had been invited too. I was alone in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I heard the kitchen door open and saw him walk in. He was wearing gold cycling shorts which clearly showed off everything. At the time, I thought it was just a fashion choice, but now I see that he wanted people to look. He said to me, "If you were my daughter, I would never let you leave the house looking so sexy. Thank you for keeping our secret." I don't remember my exact answer, but it was something along the lines of, "Sexy is a bad word." He started to pull down his shorts, and I panicked and called my Nan. She rushed in to see him standing over me, quickly pulling his shorts up and with an erection. Thankfully, I never saw him masturbating after this. My Nan called the police and he got a warning. In my opinion, this wasn't enough for what he did. I lived next door to him for another 6 years. I'm a man in my late 20s. I work graveyard shift, midnight to 8 a.m., and have since turned 18. At the time of the story, I lived with my wife and newborn daughter in a third-story apartment. Front door to the apartment and a small kitchen window are both accessible from the outside, but all other windows and the patio door, which is attached to the living room, are about 40 feet off the ground. We live in a pretty safe neighborhood, but it's surrounded by some pretty sketchy areas. Also important to note is that the only air conditioner we have is window mounted to our master bedroom, so all 3 of us were sleeping in that one room. My daughter was only a month old at the time. It's late July and blistering hot outside. I'm a cold weather kind of person, so anything over 75 degrees and I'm fucking miserable. So I've got the windows open and the sliding door to the deck is wide open too, trying to get a breeze going through the house since only the bedroom has AC. To make matters worse, I've come down with this fever that is just kicking my ass, and I've just had a baby, so I'm running on about 10 hours of sleep for the whole of the last month. As I said, I normally work graveyard, but this particular night as I went out to the living room to get dressed for work, I could barely lift my arms. You know how when you have a fever, your muscles turn to jello and everything hurts? That's me to the max. So I said fuck it, called into work, and passed out hard on the couch in the living room. I proceed to have hardcore fever nightmares and eventually awake in a pool of my own sweat. Check the clock. I've only been out for about 30 minutes. I start trying to go back to sleep when I hear this thump, thump, thump. I could not for the life of me figure out where this was coming from. The thumps continued. It's not loud, but it seems like it's right on top of me. I listen as closely as my disease-addled brain will allow me. And nothing. The noise is gone as quickly as it began. I take a peek on the video monitor to make sure my daughter is doing okay and promptly go back to sleep. Thump, thump, shh. As once again I'm awake and trying to figure out what the fuck that noise is, my attention is drawn to my infant daughter crying in the other room. I know this means she's hungry, so I peel my ass off the couch and go to the kitchen to begin making her a bottle. My wife emerges from the bedroom, unaware that I'm home, and gasps with surprise, which startled me as well. I turn towards her to put her at ease, which causes the living room and the patio to be in my line of vision, though not hers as she's still in the hallway. As I'm telling her it's okay, it's just me, I see something fall from the roof on the patio, and then a moment later, a man dressed from head to toe in black drops down from the motherfucking roof of our 3-story building onto my patio. My feverish, sleep-deprived brain went full panic mode. I tried to think of words to blurt out, but all that came out was a loud panic scream as I took off running from the kitchen towards the patio door, which is wide open. The only thing keeping this fuckhead out is the flimsy-ass screen, which isn't even locked, and I'm moving like I've got cement blocks for feet thanks to this fever. Luckily, he heard my incomprehensible yelp and saw me running towards him in the darkness and decided to scurry back up onto the roof like a fucking ninja. Thump, thump, thump. I pull the door closed and lock it. My wife runs off to call 911. While waiting for the police to arrive, I see that he has left his duffel bag on the deck. When the police show up and investigate the bag, I was very upset by what they found inside. Zip ties, duct tape, condoms, disposable cameras, rope, a rather sizable dildo, a couple box cutters, and a nice big hunting knife. I have little doubt of what this man came to do that night, and if I had not decided to stay home, I don't see what would have stopped him. My husband and I moved into this house about 9 months ago. At first, the neighbors seemed okay. We are the high and by type. There's a woman who lives directly across the street. I'll call her Lucy. On Mother's Day, as my husband and I were leaving for brunch, Lucy wished me a happy Mother's Day, and I wished her the same. Lucy began approaching our driveway as we started to pull off. I didn't want to be rude, so I rolled down the window and told her we were in a hurry and we could talk when I returned. She became hysterical, yelling obscenities and throwing her hands in the air. My husband pulled off. When we returned, we noticed 3 of our 4 planters on pedestal stands located outside the front door were turned over. As we got out the car, she ran out of the house and stood at the end of her driveway. She didn't say anything. She just watched us. We decided to go to the store, replace the planters, and clean everything up when we put up the new planters. We also decided to get 6 Wi-Fi security cameras to put in all of our windows in case she pulled something like that again. When we pulled up, Lucy ran out again, but this time she brought a chair to the end of her driveway to watch us. As we were cleaning up and replacing the planters, a neighbor came to speak to us. He told us that the landlord should have warned us about Lucy, that Lucy sometimes does things like that if she feels slighted or disrespected. Our response was we were not there for her entertainment or companionship, and she needs to stay away from our property. When we began installing the cameras, she went back into the house. The next day when we left for work, Lucy ran outside in a nightgown and stood at the end of the driveway with her arms folded. When we returned home, we saw the planters were moved but not knocked over. This time we weighted them down with rocks. We looked at the video and saw two girls about ages 6 and 8 come from Lucy's house. They tried to push over the planters. When they didn't succeed, they went back to Lucy's house. We called the police to get the incidences on record in case Lucy decided to escalate. For the next 2 months, every time there was movement in front of our house, if she was home, Lucy would run outside. We decided to ignore her since it was clear she was mentally unstable. One day when we came home from work, she blocked our driveway with her car. We called the police, who made her move it, but did nothing else. We explained the situation to the officer, who stated we should just keep records of her behavior and call if she makes contact with us. A week later, she blocked our driveway with her car again. We called the police again. This time they gave her a ticket. Lucy continued to run outside any time there was movement, but now she would also pull up in her vehicle about a minute before us, wait in her car and get out when we got out. This happened no matter what time we got home after work. One night we noticed she was pulling out of a driveway at the end of the block. After this, we decided to use another entrance into the subdivision. This worked for about a week. Then she sat outside of that entrance and followed us in. I began videotaping these incidents with my camera. A month ago, when things escalated, I came home for lunch and there was a huge trailer blocking my driveway. I asked the driver to move and he refused, stating he was a friend visiting Lucy. I told him to move or I would call the police. He moved, but then moved back once I parked my car. I called the police and the number on the side of the trailer. The owner stated the trailer should not have been in a residential area and apologized. The police ticketed the trailer and made the driver leave. The man visiting Lucy was arrested for outstanding warrants for unauthorized entrance and criminal trespassing. About a week after this incident, she followed us into the subdivision, parked her car, and ran to the end of our driveway. She yelled about us contacting the owner of the trucking company and how stupid we were for doing that. She turned around and went to her driveway when she saw I had my cell phone recording her. We called the police, who took another report and warned her to stay away from us and the house. She went on about how we didn't own the house and how she could go anywhere she wants on our property. The officer warned her that if she does come on our property, she could be arrested. About a week ago, a group of kids came on our property, began fighting on the front lawn and throwing trash everywhere. Lucy sat on the porch and yelled for the kids to yell louder and fight more. We called the police. The officer told us that they were just kids playing and they all denied being sent by Lucy. We showed the officer the video and he still refused to do anything. He told Lucy to stay away from us, a warning other officers have made and she continues to ignore. The day after this, it was 40 degrees. Lucy came outside and stood in the middle of the street, watching us. She has continued to do this every day, including this morning. It's obvious the police are not going to do anything. We have 3 more months left on our lease. Needless to say, we're going to move. But until then, we will keep calling police and saving the video recordings of her stalking and harassing us. I live in Norway, which is a small and safe country, where usually the creepiest thing to happen to you would be a nasty look from a stranger on the bus. Because of this, I never thought anything creepy would happen to me, because, well, it just doesn't happen here. The city I live in is called Hannafors, which basically translates to Chicken Falls. In the fall of 2015, right around the time I turned 20 years old, I moved out from my mom's into my first apartment. The apartment was in the basement of a house, and the owner of the house was an older single woman who lived above me, but we didn't get along that well. The house was situated at the end of a gravel road in a wooded area with fields around it, about 1 kilometer from the main road. The last part of the road before you got to the house was up on a steep hill. To get to my apartment, you had to walk through the front gate and around the house to get to the basement where I lived. Right outside my door, there was a small porch which was usually just used if I or any guests wanted to smoke. Because of the house being up on a hill, there was a really steep wooded slope about 5 meters from the entrance. This was also the end of the backyard, so I basically lived right next to the woods. So this all started in May 2016 when my boyfriend Sam moved in. He lived in Oslo, and therefore we needed a car to move all his things. His best friend Jessica agreed to help us when she got off work, which meant it was going to be a long night. Around 11 p.m. we left Oslo and started to drive to my place. Because of road work, we had to stop for some time and didn't arrive until 1 a.m. at my place. Because Hønefoss is a small city, it was dead silent when we arrived. We started unloading the car and I grabbed some plastic bags and went around the house. Right as I stepped onto the small porch outside the basement, I heard a sound from the woods down the steep slope. It was the sound of leaves rustling in a particular rhythm, as if someone was walking in the woods and kicking the leaves when they lifted their feet. I thought this was kind of weird, because I knew there wasn't any kind of hiking trail down there, or any other reason for someone to be walking there, especially at 1 a.m. It was just woods and an empty field. Sam came up behind me and he also stopped, wondering why I was just standing there listening. "Shh, do you hear that?" "The leaf sounds," I asked, but he didn't answer. Jessica also stopped to listen at this for a moment. "Hear what?" Jessica asked, but before I even had the chance to answer her, Sam told her about the rustling sound. "Yeah, I hear it." "What is it?" she asked, but I literally had no idea. We all just brushed it off as some neighbors or kids, even though there wasn't a lot of neighbors that far into the woods. About a week later at 1 a.m., me and Sam sat outside smoking when I heard the sounds from the woods. We joked about what it could be, because as I said, we're from Norway, and creepy things just don't happen here. Stupid thinking, I know. We didn't pay much attention to the sounds, and eventually we went inside. A week later, same time, we heard the noises again. At this time, I actually pieced together that this happened at the same weekday, same time, which was kind of strange, and we got a little scared. We joked about it being a killer living in an abandoned house next to us. We laughed and, again, brushed it off as just some kids or an animal, but still, we were somewhat afraid of what it could actually be. The next week passed without any sounds from the woods, and we completely forgot about it, until the week after. I didn't want to smoke, so Sam went out on the porch alone. After a few minutes, Sam busts through the door. His eyes were wide and he sounded scared as he whispered, "Quick, I can hear those sounds again." I ran outside and listened from the porch. Sam was right. The sounds were there again, the same rhythm and pace as before, only this time it sounded as if though they were closer. I was a little nervous, so I just looked at Sam, who was just as nervous as me. Still, being so sure of nothing happening to us because of our safe country, we walked closer to the slope and I shouted, "Ha ha, very funny. Maybe I should call the police to let them know someone is creeping around my house." We both just laughed, and then we heard the sound stopping immediately. Thinking we scared off whoever it was creeping in the woods, we enjoyed the silence and shouted, "Lol." And right as I shouted, we hear the sound again, just faster and louder. And this time it sounded as if someone was full-on sprinting right towards us from down the steep slope. Just imagine if you ever tried walking up a steep hill covered in leaves, and your feet almost slipping under you because of it being so steep. That was the sound we could hear. At the same time, both Sam and I just turned around and ran as fast as we could inside, cigarette still in hand. We locked the door and turned off all the lights and fall to the floor. I was incredibly terrified. "Did you just hear that?" I asked. Sam looked terrified and nodded. "Someone was running towards us," I asked. He just nodded again, Right as he nodded, we hear a sound that still gives us both goosebumps to this date. It was the sound of boots walking on the wooden porch. It was so shocking, my mouth was just open while holding my breath, scared that whoever was on the other side of the door could hear us. Sam looked at me and pointed to the door in panic, signaling that he also heard it. I lifted my shoulders. I guess it's the international gesture of I don't know. We both just sat there for some time, too scared to move to the living room, when we heard a loud bang on the window next to the door. We both just sat there trying not to make a sound. Now, the way the house was built was so that the upstairs where the lady lived was at street level, but if you went around the back, it would look like a 2-story house, even though my apartment was the basement. So basically just half my apartment was the basement, if that makes any sense. The layout of my apartment was that when you entered the apartment, there was a bedroom to your right, a kitchen straight ahead of you. Next to it was a bathroom, which was between the kitchen and the living room, which was to your left. The living room was fully underground and just had a small window by the ceiling, and you could just see a flower bed and a bush. But now, we also could see a pair of worn-out boots in the dark. I looked at Sam and pointed to the window and whispered, "Kafan," Norwegian for what the fuck. Sam didn't say anything and just looked at me, still terrified. I'm not sure if the person outside even knew where the apartment was, because then he would have probably sat down to look at us. Maybe he thought that the basement upstairs were connected and that we ran inside and upstairs, and now the person outside was trying to look inside to see if he could see us. We crawled into the bathroom and locked the door and just sat there. We didn't have our phones, so I'm not sure how long we sat there. We sat there listening, but we couldn't hear anything. After probably half an hour, we crawled into the living room and put the sofa pillows in front of the small window and called my mother to ask what we should do and if we should bother to call the police. Stupid Norwegians, I know. We should have just called them as soon as we got our phones, but it's just not how we do it over here, and besides, the person was most likely gone now anyways. My mother was kind of angry that we woke her up at 2 a.m., but after we told her what had happened, she said it was okay and that we should call the police if we felt it was necessary. At that time, we were just tired, and we knew that there was nothing the police could do. I mean, we didn't actually see the face of this person or anything other than his boots after he went away. We moved out about a week after that. For reference, I'm a 20-year-old Hooters girl and encounter creepy guys all the time, but never like this. I occasionally get asked for my number and to go on dates by older men, but always politely turn them down without really upsetting anyone. I was working the night shift the other night and had a 40-something-year-old man sit at my table by himself. I greeted them the way I greet all customers, lots of smiling, laugh at their jokes, ask about his or her day, etc. He was really irritated and didn't seem to want to talk to me at all, so I assumed he was there to eat and go without all the chatting customers expect from the waitresses. I offered a box and dessert at the end of his meal, but he just paid and got up to leave. When I brought back his change, he grabbed my arm and pulled me close and said, "I want you so badly," before letting go and walking out the door. I was so uncomfortable I just stood there until he left. This was around 8 p.m., so I told the other girls, then I just kinda got over it. We closed at midnight on weekdays, so by the time I was ready to go, it was about 1:30 a.m. I carry a stun gun in my bag and normally have someone walk me to my car, but it was so late that nearly everyone had already left, and those that were still there were busy trying to clean up so they could leave. I had parked right in front of the doors, leaving my car only 5 feet away, so I decided to quickly get in my car without being walked. I always lock my doors out of habit and went to check my phone, which was dead. I have one of those crappy chargers in my car that only charge at a certain angle, and was trying to get my phone to charge when a truck pulled up behind me, blocking me in. I couldn't pull forward because the restaurant was in front of me, and I couldn't back up because of this truck. At first I thought it was my roommate who will sometimes come check on me if I get home too late to make sure I'm okay. It was a silver truck, which is what my roommate drives, and when I turned to look at it, it was a different model, which made my heart sink. This person then proceeded to honk their horn at me over and over for a good 5 minutes, trying to get me out of my car. When I refused because Mama didn't raise an idiot, he pulled up next to me, started knocking on my window, and yelled at me to get out of my car. It was the same guy that was at my table 5 hours earlier. My phone wouldn't turn on, so I switched into reverse and fast and furious my way out of the parking lot. He started following me with his truck, so I ran a red light and started speeding. He stopped at the light, and I drove for a bit before going home in case he caught up and tried following me to my house. I checked my car when I got home in case he hit my car and was trying to let me know, but I didn't see any marks. I don't know whether he was trying to rob or kidnap me, but creepy man who waited for 5 hours in the parking lot for me, I really hope we never meet again. So I'm a female, late 30s, and I'm a travel counselor for a large tour company. We are pretty well known, so I'm not going to be dropping any names for anonymity's sake. So as a travel counselor, fancy smancy way of saying travel agent, I book many cruises. Both my company and the many cruise lines offer us in the industry what's known as a fam trip, to familiarize us with what the cruise line offers. So I was approached 2 weeks before the holidays with the chance to take such a trip on a 4-night cruise to the Baja Peninsula. It left the day after Christmas. Since my husband had a big guy's trip with his BFF lined up, I thought perfect. My in-laws have been begging us to watch our 7-year-old daughter, so she went to grandma's and I went on a free cruise. What could go wrong? A little sand, surf, and sun, and while it's winter, 66-degree days are much warmer than the teens and below zeros we have up north. The flight was perfect. The embarking went smooth as butter. The lovely balcony room I was put on was wonderful. So far so good, right? That night I'm at dinner and an Indian man sits next to me. Now this struck me as odd as there were several empty seats available. He strikes up conversation, introduces himself, and says he's traveling with his elderly parents, sister, and her family. He's 26, works in communications, and attended college in London. He seems nice. We have a lovely conversation, and I throw in that I'm happily married, have a child, etc. Finally, his family arrives to eat, and we part ways. I figured I'll never see him again. The next day I get off at our port. I signed up for a Segway tour, and who do I see in my line? My new friend and his father, and I assume is his oldest nephew. He of course waves at me, and we make simple chit-chat before starting our tour. After the tour, there was the opportunity to walk around. I chose to browse the shops and get some pizza. However, I felt I was being watched or followed. I turned around a few times but didn't see anyone. I shrugged it off and went about my day. I go back to the ship, change into my bathing suit, and go lay out on the deck. It's a perfect 72-degree day and my skin loved the vitamin D. I order a drink and put in my wireless headphones. I'm dozing when I feel hands roughly shake me. I jolt sitting straight up. It's my friend, although he's frowning, staring at me disapproving. He angrily tells me I'm not allowed to show off my body and that I'm disrespecting him and his religion by acting like a slut. By now I have 2 cruise employees I'm friends with. I've taken many cruises and get to know the employees, who hear the commotion and are telling him he needs to leave me alone. Never mind, I'm embarrassed. I tell him I'm a married woman and what I do isn't of his concern. As he stomps off, he informs me if I was his woman, I'd be sorry. I figured I won't have to deal with him, and the next day is perfect. No sign of him, we are at sea, and I hang out on my balcony sunning and dozing. That night, after a few martinis at the piano bar, I settle in my room for the night after talking with my hubby through Facebook Messenger. I'm about to doze when my door starts shaking. It sounds as if someone is violently running into my door. I throw a robe on and look out the peephole. It's the Indian guy. He looked crazed. It was formal night, so he's in formal wear, hair mused, red face screaming profanities at me. Luckily, the guy across the hall is a pretty big guy, opens his door and tells the creep to get the hell out of the hall before his kids were woken up. Indian guy gives one last profanity and then leaves. The next morning, the guy across the hall tells me something terrifying. He swears the guy had a steak knife in his hand. I informed the cruise director, but I'm not sure what happened after that. I only saw him one more time on the cruise as we were disembarking. He was carrying one of his nieces, and luckily didn't see me. I'm a late 20s male, around 6'4" and around 180 pounds. I am sometimes too nice to my friends. I tend to do favors for friends even if they seem pretty ridiculous, as long as it's not terribly out of my way. Most of the time it's, help, I'm drunk and need a ride home. Well, one night at 1:30 a.m. I get the call. A very, very drunk friend of mine, Claire, is begging me to come pick her up and give her a ride home soon. The bar is closing soon and she's too drunk to drive home. The bar she is at isn't too far from my house, about a 10 to 15 minute drive. But the issue is that she lives like 35 to 45 minutes on the other side of town. Claire has been extremely nice to me in the past, and I did owe her a solid. So at about 10 to 2, I grab my keys and my concealed carry and leave the house. I get to the bar around 2:05, and she's sitting outside on a bench by the doorman. I pull into the parking lot, which was pretty empty since the bar is closed, and I assume that the cars remaining were the workers who hadn't yet left. I get out of the car and start walking to Claire, who is kind of slumped over. I was hoping she wasn't passed out drunk, and when I got to her, the doorman asked if I was her ride. I told him yes, showed my ID for proof, and what he said next was of some concern. He pulls me in and says, "Hey, I was supposed to leave when we closed, but I have a strong feeling your friend was roofied. She's been on the porch drinking all night and some guy kept hovering around her. I assumed it was a boyfriend or whatever, but she never turned to talk to the guy. She was either drinking or chatting with the other girls around her. Well, anyways, she chugged her last drink, came up to me and told me you would be coming to pick her up, and she asked me if she could sit by me. She told me she felt very dizzy and sick. I told her sure, hoping she just drank too much, and she passed out right after she sat down. After that, I couldn't see the guy anymore, but I didn't want to take any chances." So, visibly concerned, I thanked the guy profusely, and he even helps me carry Claire to my car. Midway to carrying her, she's kind of coming to, like someone just waking up after surgery. That really groggy, not knowing where they are, talking of nonsense kind of talking. I don't remember exactly what she was talking about, but I'm sure if I wasn't on high alert about her possibly being drugged, it was some funny-ass shit. So we get her buckled in. I thank the guy again, and he just says he hopes she gets home safe. So now, hoping my friend is only stupid drunk and not drugged, I start driving to her house. The whole time I'm trying to keep an eye on her and an eye on the road. She's now snoring asleep, which puts me at a bit of an ease, but about halfway to her house, my fuel light comes on. Cursing the fuel economy of a sports car, I pull into the next gas station. It's one of those small gas stations that doesn't have a 24-hour store, so I'm on extra high alert while I start to pump gas. The gas station is about a block from the freeway, and right at the corner of the intersection. The street itself is pretty dark, with lonely lampposts shining very pitiful lights at large intervals. I get that really dead feeling, like this place is just abandoned. To give an idea of positioning, because this is important, the gas station is at the corner of the intersection. The storefront would be facing south, and we were right in front of it where the pumps were. The east would be where there are the air pumps for tires and parking spaces, and the north would be a diesel fuel pump right behind the store, accessible from the street behind the gas station. I drive a Corvette, so the filler is on the rear end of the car, and I'm leaning against the rear looking around. To my left, I hear this weird metallic scraping, so I turn and see this guy, about 15 to 20 feet from me, come around the corner dragging a long metal pipe on the ground. I immediately sense I'm in a possibly dangerous situation now. The guy looks almost possessed, but he's not looking at me, rather like he's trying to look into my car. I'm on the defensive, but hope I can get him to leave, so I call out, "Hey, everything all right?" Without looking at me, he answers back, "You took my girlfriend from me. I'm here to take her back." Now he turns to look at me, and he's got blood in his eyes. Before he begins to take a step, though, I start yelling, hoping it'll get him to back off. I'm a little over 6 feet tall and not exactly skinny, but not exactly bulky either, but I have a really deep voice. "Hey, back the fuck off! Turn around and leave and no one has to get hurt." He takes a step towards me, clearly unimpressed, so almost automatically I pull my handgun from my inside the waistband holster and draw a bead on him. "Back the fuck off! You don't have to die!" I start yelling louder, pretty sure my voice cracked because A, I'm scared shitless. No amount of self-defense classes and time at the range prepares you emotionally for this kind of situation, and B, even though I carry, I'm really against violence and killing someone is not something I want to do. And C, did I mention I'm fucking terrified? Anyway, in a panic, the fucker throws the pipe at me. It whizzes by, thankfully not towards my car but to my right, and I dive behind my car for cover. I have no idea if he has a gun himself or what, but I was going to put some kind of cover between me and him, and by the time I kneel up and aim over the rear of my car, he's booked it. I hear a car door slam and tires screech, and he launches off the curb on the east side of the lot and is tearing down the road, swaying all over the place. In my own panicked hurry, I pull the pump out of the car, screw the cap, and tear out of there myself. Claire, however, is still passed out in my car, and now I'm afraid because I'm convinced she's been drugged and we were followed by that guy. Me being more concerned about her earlier and keeping on the road, I must not have noticed being followed. The whole way back to our house, I'm wary of any car that's behind me. I'm also speeding like a jackass, and when I get to Claire's neighborhood, I circle a separate block that's not hers 4 times to make sure no one's followed me. When I was satisfied, thinking I wasn't being followed anymore, I pulled up to her house and tried to shake her awake. She's doing that groggy waking up stuff from before, but now she's able to get up. I'm able to walk her. Thankfully, I was worried I was going to have to call an ambulance if she didn't wake up, and I get her keys from her bag. I managed to walk her inside, and at this point she's kind of coming around, asking me what's going on and where she is, etc. I tell her she's home and get her to lie down. She's completely lost looking, and her eyes start welling up. She clings to me and starts sobbing. She's still very out of it, but I'm guessing she realizes something bad was going on or attempted on her. I was able to get her to lie down and get her to sleep. I read a note for her which is pretty much saying, "Hey, I'll be in the next room. We're going to the hospital in the morning to get you checked out." Fast forward to the morning. She's sick as a dog, and after she expelled some demons from her stomach, I drove her to the hospital where she got tested and treated. I still shudder to think what might have happened had I not had my concealed carry weapon with me. I do know martial arts to an extent, but that's not something I want to take against a crazy person with a pipe. Claire still doesn't remember much from the night, except calling me and wanting to sit next to the doorman. My advice for you guys: either be with friends you trust when you go out, or at least be vigilant if you're by yourself. That night could have ended badly in 1,000 different ways, but thankfully, even luckily, everyone made it out safe. When I was 22, I moved 1,000 miles away from my Midwest home to the beautiful foothills of Tennessee. I had a new job, new car, and a nice apartment, but didn't know a soul outside of work. If my phone rang, I expected to hear a faraway family member or my long-distance boyfriend, still in college. This was a landline, no cell phones yet. Despite being very alone, I was managing well with the excitement of all the new things in my life. I'd only lived there for about 2 weeks when the unwanted calls started. The first call, a man's friendly voice asked what I was doing. I couldn't place him and thought maybe it was one of my cousins or uncles. I have a huge extended family. I ask his name. He laughs a little, and his tone gets dark, a bit angry. He says, "You know exactly who this is, darling." I pause, deciding if this guy simply called the wrong number or is a creep. I choose the former, laugh, and politely tell him he has the wrong number. He then recites my brand new, unlisted, unpublished phone number and my name. What the fuck? An intense chill races through me. I've only given my number to my parents, sister, boyfriend, apartment manager, and employer. I'm new to the city in this lovely southern state. He does not like it when I tell him he called the wrong number and starts yelling at me, then tells me in a much calmer voice the many vulgar things he's going to do to me. I hang up and brush it off. He calls again around 1 a.m. I tell him to fuck himself and hang up. He keeps calling, so I unplug the phone and return to sleep. However, as days go by, the calls continue and escalate. He starts mentioning personal things about me, said he liked the white quilt on my bed, knew what was in my fridge, and that he's allergic to cats. I had one, and then asked me if I was in love with Marie. As I listened to his words, I was standing in my kitchen looking at the calendar taped to the fridge. It had Marie written in pink on the 17th with a heart around it, because Marie is my sister and the 17th is her birthday. I started shaking and crying because suddenly I realized this creep has been inside my apartment. I was alone, with no friends or family to run to for the night. It was me versus a creepy mystery man. I didn't sleep much that night. Early the next morning, I talked to the apartment complex manager before heading to work, telling her what had happened and that I want the locks changed that day. She gets a weird look on her face, and after a long pause says she knows who's been inside my apartment and that it won't happen again. What? Turns out she had a creepy, rapey maintenance guy who noticed a young woman moving into an apartment alone and thought I was his new pet. She had the locks changed immediately and promised that she would personally keep the other key. Although the calls stopped, I was paranoid for a year as I came and went from my apartment because I never even knew what this guy looked like. I moved out the moment my lease was up. Only after thinking about it years later did I realize that her weird expression likely meant that it had happened before. Only after thinking about it years later did I realize that her weird expression likely meant that it had happened before. Plus, she didn't even fire him. I regret not calling the cops. I was young and naive. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza. and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I look like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with this guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy, high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she had been drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again, and every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max, Max, Max. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out, and it doesn't help me that she kind of looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into the story and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops. She wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower her volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade, just in case. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned on my phone. And to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that had been sent to me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between "Hi, how are you?" to "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wondered if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? For some background information, I live in a small apartment complex right outside my campus with some friends. I am also a 20-year-old girl. So all my friends were always bashing on me for never meeting up with any boys or going. I'd gotten sick of it. I didn't want to be the little friend who stayed home and eats pizza while friends were out on dates with boys, so I signed up for Plenty of Fish. Now, I'm not the type of person who would say yes to any random stranger. They had to be nice looking, they had to have plenty of photos of themselves, and we both had to have at least 2 common interests. So with those rules in my head, I psyched myself up to join the world of online dating. Within a few days, I already had 2 boys I was talking to. One said he was a doctor, kinda hard to believe because he was 20, and one said he worked as a construction guy, easier to believe. I didn't think that the doctor guy was lying to me. But one day, as I was getting crap from my roommates, the construction guy, who we can call Dan, messaged me on a messaging app we were using and asked if I wanted to go out for a bite to eat. I told my roommates where I was going and who I was with. You know, all the things someone should do so someone knows if you've been abducted. I even had a check-in time so that when my roommates texted me if things were good, I had to say some silly code word that meant things were going good. If I responded with another code word, it meant "help me get out of this," and if I didn't use code words, then she would call the police for help. So I quickly dolled myself up and got ready for my date. I put my hair in a classy bun, leaving strips of it hanging down around my glasses. I put on a nice white blouse and some black pants, and I was ready to go. I jumped in my car and headed out to the restaurant where warning. In my opinion, this wasn't enough for what he did. I lived next door to him for another 6 years. I'm a man in my late 20s. I work graveyard shift, midnight to 8 a.m., and have since turned 18. At the time of the story, I lived with my wife and newborn daughter in a 3rd-story apartment. Front door to the apartment and a small kitchen window are both accessible from the outside, but all other windows and the patio door, which is attached to the living room, are about 40 feet off the ground. We live in a pretty safe neighborhood, but it's surrounded by some pretty sketchy areas. Also important to note is that the only air conditioner we have is window mounted to our master bedroom, so all 3 of us were sleeping in that one room. My daughter was only a month old at the time. It's late July and blistering hot outside. I'm a cold weather kind of person, so anything over 75 degrees and I'm fucking miserable. So I've got the windows open and the sliding door to the deck is wide open too, trying to get a breeze going through the house since only the bedroom has AC. To make matters worse, I've come down with this fever that is just kicking my ass, and I've just had a baby, so I'm running on about 10 hours of sleep for the whole of the last month. As I said, I normally work graveyard, but this particular night as I went out to the living room to get dressed for work, I could barely lift my arms. You know how when you have a fever your muscles turn to jello and everything hurts? That's me to the max. So I said fuck it, called into work and passed out hard on the couch in the living room. I proceed to have hardcore fever nightmares and eventually awake in a pool of my own sweat. Check wrong. Later that day, I saw a text from a random number telling me how pretty I'd looked in my blue PJs. I glanced outside just in time to see none other than Dan running down my road. How the hell did he get my number? I thought warily. I blocked that number and continued what I was doing. Later that night, I fell asleep pretty early and woke up to my phone text alert going crazy. It was from the number I had just blocked earlier that day. There were dozens of messages saying how I was going to get it. I quickly showed all my roommates the messages. They all told me that I should go to the police, but since I was a stupid person, I didn't. I blocked the number again and went back to sleep. But once again, I woke up to my phone buzzing. I didn't wait. I jumped in my car and drove all the way down to the police station. Once there, they told me they couldn't do much to help me and just told me to block the number. I did. At least I had it on record. Nothing happened for a few days. The number stayed blocked on my phone for a while. About then, the pictures started. They were pictures of my house, of me in my house, my car, and my work. I went back to the police, and finally, I was able to get a restraining order against Dan. I never received any messages from Dan again after that. I now never, ever use dating websites. At the age of around 6 or 7, I lived next door to an old 60-or-so-year-old man named Keith. He would often go running around the streets as if he was very fit for his age. At the time, I lived with my grandmother. She was friends with him and would often invite Dan had chosen. It was just out of my town, but it was still only a 15-minute drive from my apartment. I arrived at the restaurant and saw him almost immediately. He was wearing some nice clothes and looked just like his photos. He was waiting just outside the restaurant doors for me. His eyes lit up when they saw me. He walked over to me and smiled. We chatted a little bit outside since it was summer and not too cold outside, and then walked inside. We ate dinner and talked about our life and things like how school was going. I got the text from my friend, but since everything was all good, I sent that good code word back. Dan talked about how much he liked his job and things, and altogether it was pretty nice. Except for one thing. Dan was boring. He didn't do anything exciting or really talk enthusiastic about anything, and it was boring. It was an average date, and I honestly didn't care to go on anymore. The next day I woke up to the feeling of my phone vibrating nonstop. I looked at it and realized it was vibrating so much that it had fallen off my dresser. I almost laughed. Then I saw all the messages were from Dan. At first they were all things of how much fun he had had and that he would really like to go out again. But then the messages took a turn. They got violent and angry that I wasn't responding. It was 7 in the frickin' morning. I was sleeping. I noped out of that situation. I texted him back and said I had been sleeping and that, no, I was not going on any more dates with him. I was just about to block his profile on both sites when I got a final message. "Watch your back," it said. At first I was really creeped out, but then I thought that since I had blocked him and all my accounts were deleted, he could do nothing. Invite him round for a cup of tea and to gossip. Things were fine for a little while. Until one day, I looked out my window in my bedroom. From my window, I could clearly see into his garden. He was laying on a deck chair, masturbating. As I was a child, I didn't understand, of course. I assumed he didn't know I was there. The next day, I went to open the curtains in the morning and saw him doing the same thing again. He looked up at me and smiled, then carried on. A few weeks later, with me not mentioning it to my Nan, in case she thought I was lying about it, I continued to see him almost daily. I started to realize it wasn't right when I noticed he would make an effort to make me look, by doing such things as making loud noises outside and even shouting my name. Soon after, it was my birthday. My Nan invited him round to my party as most of our neighbors had been invited too. I was alone in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I heard the kitchen door open and saw him walk in. He was wearing gold cycling shorts which clearly showed off everything. At the time, I thought it was just a fashion choice, but now I see that he wanted people to look. He said to me, "If you were my daughter, I would never let you leave the house looking so sexy. Thank you for keeping our secret." I don't remember my exact answer, but it was something along the lines of, "Sexy is a bad word." He started to pull down his shorts, and I panicked and called my nan. She rushed in to see him standing over me, quickly pulling his shorts up and with an erection. Thankfully, I never saw him masturbating after this. My nan called the police, and he got